G'day mate, 40 here. So I just saw this James Carville interview where he says that Republicans support Israel over Palestine because the Israeli Jews are whiter than the Palestinians. And I think he is just using the inverse of the typical Democratic Party approach, which is woke culture, which is that brown people should be exempt from public criticism because they've been marginalized and oppressed by Europeans. And so he thinks that Republicans just do the opposite of the Democrats' woke culture, that Republicans automatically support the Jewish state because its enemies are browner than they are. So this whole anti-imperialism, settler colonialism theory is essentially based or is an extension of woke culture, that brown people are always the victims of Europeans. I don't think Republicans are particularly invested in Israel, but if you're on the right, you are more sensitive and you react more strongly to outgroup threats. So people have a general disposition to have negative feelings about strangers, and people on the right tend to have more intense negative feelings about strangers, while people on the left are usually more open to strangers. And in some circumstances, greater openness to strangers is going to be more adaptive because you'll be able to learn from them and trade with them and enlist them in your projects. And then in other circumstances, that's going to be maladaptive because strangers will be a threat. You never know other people's intentions. You can never know another group's intentions. And so people can be friendly one day and a genocidal threat the next day. So Republicans, compared to Democrats, by and large, have a greater threat sensitivity. They have more intense negative feelings about outgroups, and they have more intense negative feelings about Islam than do Democrats, and they have more intense feelings about third world terrorism than do Democrats. Republicans have more intense reactions to things such as 9/11 or Islamic terrorism in general, because Republicans generally will have stronger in-group identities and with that more hostility to outgroups. So Joe Biden almost lost the 2020 presidential election because of the increasing unpopularity of Black Lives Matter, which was incredibly disruptive to American life. Life for millions of Americans was damaged by Black Lives Matter riots. And now you've got these pro-Palestine riots kicking off on American college campuses again and at the Democratic National Convention. And I just don't see how that is good for the Democrats, right? You've got riots going on at Columbia University right now. And the Democrats are in a quandary because their money comes from pro-Israel Jews, but their most intense, passionate supporters tend to be anti-Israel. While Republicans are primarily about their in-group, and Israel is sometimes a useful issue to use against Democrats, but it's not key to Republican or conservative or traditional American identity, right? When I was in Australia, there was a general attitude that if you're not Australian, you don't matter much. And that's the normal human way of looking at the world, that if you're not part of this nation, then you don't really matter much. And so I just saw an article in the news, why weren't American Marines punished for some massacre in Iraq? I think the Haditha massacre. Well, William Calley, who led a major massacre of Vietnamese, right? He got about 3 years of home detention for carrying out a massacre. So Americans like every other people in the world, don't really care that much about massacres of outgroups. So American troops, Australian troops, English troops, British, German troops who massacre outgroups, their in-group back home doesn't really care that much. And so there's will among elites to punish these massacres of outgroups. But among regular Americans, regular Australians, right, among regular people, there's just no intense feelings about mistreatment of outgroups, because for regular people, their area of concern does not extend outside of their own country. Right? Most people primarily concerned about their family, their friends, their community, and their nation. They don't really care about what members of their military do to outgroups. In effect, the way the world works is nobody cares much about outgroups, except for intellectuals, and then it's a way to show that they're superior to everyone else. Okay, what advice do you want for a man between 21 and 31? Is it work out, go to work? Okay, here's my advice. If you feel lonely, that is a big wake-up call that something's really wrong, because you'll only feel lonely after you really are lonely, and it's reached a level of intensity of loneliness that your system is alerting you that something's wrong. So to me, the most important thing that you can do is to develop, number one, a sense of self-respect, right? To develop your reputation with yourself so that you respect the way that you spend your time. And then the second most important thing you can do is to develop your relationship with your friends and family and community. And if you're feeling lonely, and if you're feeling self-hating, and if you lack a sense of self-efficacy, right, these are all big warning signs. So I think it begins with leading a life that you respect, right, taking decisions that you respect, right, following through on your word, right. So if you have certain assignments that you need to do to maintain your standing at school or at work, and you're not doing the things that you need to do to meet your adult responsibilities, you're going to lack self-respect. Other people are going to pick up on it, and so people with self-respect are not going to want to hang out with you. Right? If you're an under-earner, no one who is not an under-earner is going to want to hang out with you. So if you have some disabling addiction, if you are unable to stop behavior that creates self-loathing, right, then upstanding people won't want to hang out with you. But if you have a high measure of self-respect, good relations with friends and family, then you're on an excellent track in life. So I'll let you respond to that before I say anything further. But the most important reputation you can have is your own reputation with yourself, meaning that you follow through on your adult responsibilities. So if you are consistently spending more than you earn, if you are, say, a psychologist who's a therapist who's not getting his notes done every day, right, where you write up your sessions with your clients, if you're an attorney and you're not getting your filing in on time, you're not meeting deadlines, right? If you're an accountant and you're making careless errors, right? If you don't have a sense of being in control of your life, then that's a big worry, right? That's something that has to be addressed, whether it's through a 12-step program, therapy, getting a mentor. So I think the number one goal for me is to lead a life that I respect. So yesterday I wanted to discuss Mike Benz, who's a bloke I know fairly well from his days as Frame Game Radio. And I'm not a cyber expert, so I couldn't definitively declare whether the major points that Mike Benz were making were factually true or not, but I knew enough to raise questions and to know, okay, this doesn't ring true. He seems to be deliberately exaggerating his credentials. So he presents himself as a man who ran cyber for the State Department. Right? He was at the State Department less than 2 months. Right? It's impossible to believe that he ran a cyber at the State Department. So he's very good at framing things and creating narratives that are emotionally appealing, but nobody with expertise in any of the areas that he talks about regards him as credible. So I think I did a good live stream for about 3 hours yesterday. Probably did about 5 hours, 6 hours of prep for it. So I respect that work that I did. Then I rested, ate lunch, so took good care of myself, and then went to the beach, went for a long hike, caught up with friends, and then came home and worked out, ate a light dinner, and by that time it was about 7:45 p.m. and I have these various procedures, right, low-key exercises that I do to notice, locate, and release unnecessary tension in my body. And so I did those while watching The Detectorists, which is a terrific, I think it's a BBC TV show that Matt Brown of Decoding the Guru said was his favorite show. And so from the time I got up, 6 a.m. until the time I went to bed, which was about shortly before 10 p.m., right, I respect pretty much all my decisions. I had time with friends. I had time untangling Mike Benz and his claims. I took good care of my body, had a long walk. I went to the beach, got in a new space, being around the water. It just feels good. And so I had a day that I had a respect for. How can I do networking with big personalities? Okay, so until you are a person with self-respect, right, nobody's going to want to hang out with you. So you have to have yourself in order, right? Are you leading days, like I just described my Sunday, are you leading days where you're proud of your decisions, right? If there was a camera on you during your waking hours and your choices were broadcast to the world, would you be proud of your choices? So unless you're leading a life of integrity, self-efficacy, meaning that you're accomplishing the things that you set out to accomplish, that you're spending your time wisely, right, that you're following through on what you intend to follow through on, that you're meeting your responsibilities, that you're maintaining the quality of your relationships, right? Unless you're leading that kind of upstanding life, no one who is upstanding is going to want to hang out with you unless you're doing that. So I think it's primarily an internal matter, right? That you are able to respect your choices. And then once you lead a life where you consistently respect your choices and you do the things that you say you're going to do, right? Once you reach that level, then you make sure that you're maintaining good relations with other people, and then these winning patterns will create virtuous spirals, so that when you encounter more effective, more high-powered people, right, they're going to feel relaxed around you, right? We all set off a vibration, so people will react to us with either increased tension or increased relaxation. People will feel happy around us, or people will feel ill at ease around us. So we have to have that internal work under control, and then that sets the foundation for more success with others. So I remember I was hanging out a lot with a guy who earned over $1 million a year, but I wasn't internally under control. And so I was in a spiral where I kept making jokes that offended him, and I didn't take sufficient notice of how offended he was. So I just blew up that friendship, right, with powerful, influential, brilliant, highly educated, highly connected person, and I blew it because internally, right, I wasn't wired right. I was just still stuck in a cycle of provocation, right? The perils of the E-personality were feeding through into my real world, and I'd gotten so addicted to shocking people online that I couldn't help but carry through with that shocking behavior in real life. And so I was blowing up potential relationships with high-powered, highly networked people. So people usually want an external solution for an internal problem, right? They want a non-spiritual solution for a spiritual problem, or they want a spiritual solution for a non-spiritual problem, right? We reach for the solutions that are most pleasant to us. So for some under owners, they'd rather just pray and meditate 5 hours a day rather than do an honest day's work. So it's interesting that Kamala Harris's first concrete policy proposals, her economic policy proposals to diminish inflation, received almost uniformly negative reviews from the news media. So the Kamala honeymoon seems to have broken. Her lead in the polls has been shrinking the past few days. And when she speaks spontaneously, it doesn't go well. When she's willing to follow directions and just follow the script, right? There's such a thirst for a Trump alternative that it's led her to the front of this race. But when you're as highly insecure as Kamala Harris, right, that inner emptiness and that tendency to freeze under pressure can reveal itself at any time. Now, she can be a formidable debater. Right, it's by no means certain that Donald Trump's going to win his debate with her. Donald Trump is not a particularly effective debater. Right, Hillary won all 3 of her debates with Donald Trump in 2016. So one thing that I'm noticing among elites, particularly among the Democrats, is that they're making plans to Trump-proof America. So the same people who have argued for years that Donald Trump is a unique threat to American democracy, that democracy itself is on the ballot, that if people elect Donald Trump, we'll never have another election, right? That kind of hysterical overreaction on the left. Right, these are the same people who want to Trump-proof America and Trump-proof NATO to try to limit the powers of the next democratically elected president. Right, it's such a complete contradiction. If you think Donald Trump's a unique threat to democracy, then Donald Trump wins, and you are set on Trump-proofing America and Trump-proofing NATO. What you're really intent on is limiting the powers of a democratically elected president, right? So people talk about liberal democracy, but liberalism and democracy are very different, right? They're very different priorities. Liberalism is an individualist philosophy where people have inalienable rights. It's very rights-focused, as opposed to democracy, where people get to choose their representatives who then get to set public policy. So in the 1940s and 50s, major people behind human rights in Europe were conservatives because they wanted to maintain traditional rights and values, and they saw the judiciary and human rights as the best way to do that, as opposed to socialists who wanted to overturn traditional ways of doing things. And now it's people on the right who generally fear the rule of judges, human rights is now overwhelmingly a left-wing concern. I can't think of any major player in human rights who was right-wing. And when you have elites talking about Trump-proofing America, Trump-proofing NATO, they're talking about limiting the power of democracy and majority decision-making, in favor of creating institutions and laws, policies and procedures that will limit the effect of democracy. Right? In a liberal democracy that's stronger in democracy than it is in liberalism, right? Then your elected representatives get more power. In a liberal democracy where liberalism is stronger than democracy, then your elected representatives have reduced power. Have I read the book Mr. Fix-It and Miss Sue by Hannah Cruz? It's a Christian book. Nope. Have not read it. Have not heard of it. What's it about?